What is up, my people? Welcome to Fellowship Bible Church's Sermon Spotlight, where we're coming at you each and every week with a fresh service to debrief in an effort to send biblical truth. And what is the best way to do that than by the power of conversation? I am Mark Francis, and I'm in the host seat today. Our fearless host leader, Caleb Pearson, is out at a retreat doing camp with students, and we will give him a shout out. What is up, Caleb? But you are not here today. So we have the lovely Miss Alicia with us again. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. And today's flower is the blazing star. And if you are watching, there is a bumblebee on the flower. The bees are crazy about that. So
and you once again, you took this picture, yeah?
Yes.
You were able.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, that's blooming in my yard right now. So, they're
amazing.
Kind of cool.
You just have a whole flower bed back there.
I have a lot of flowers. Yes, I love
That's
flowers.
Cool. Yeah.
And there's a lot of weeds, but they're blurred.
Oh, well, but that makes for a great picture.
Right.
You can blur out the weeds and show the beauty of the flower.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, once again with us, our Fellowship Bible Church pastor of biblical education, Don Den Hartog. How are you, Don?
Doing well, thank you. Good to be with you. And sorry I don't have any lovely flowers behind me, but what I have is a messy bookshelf. My administrative assistant just came in a little bit ago. She was on a Zoom class last night, and she came in and said, I noticed that your books are a little bit messy. You need a little tidying up back there. So she was going to come in and do that this morning. I said, listen, I'm on Zoom here in just a minute or so. So anyway, instead of beautiful flowers, you've got stacks of books and things that need to be sharpened up. So anyway.
Well, it's amazing.
Okay.
You know, I mean, with the COVID shutdown and being, you know, in our house for a long time, my wife, Erica, chose one day when I was actually out of the house doing some just grocery shopping to completely just take out my entire home office, and everything was out of the office and all the bookshelves were empty. And it took a couple days for me to recover. But the beauty of it was she ended up aligning all of my books, and she color coded them so it looks like a rainbow in my office. It's very amazing. So you have a standard that if you can have your assistant there, Don, just you can ask for color coding of books.
Should do that. John Morrison's library's like that. He had somebody, I mean, it's all perfectly organized. So mine's not. I don't even have them organized by topic.
That's okay.
But it's
That's a sign of a scholar that you're constantly using them. Yeah. Yeah. Well, you can see my background if anybody is watching. Again, I don't watch podcasts. I listen to them. So for those of you that are listening, you just get these stories. But you can tell where I am. Alicia, do you spot my background? This is not a virtual background.
Yes, you are in our podcast booth.
Oh.
Yeah. So this is
at the church.
This is just a nod to Caleb to say, yes, wish you were here, you know, get you back into the podcast seat. And hopefully one of these days we'll be able to record actually here in the booth. And, you know, but Zoom is actually working out very well. So we've gotten through a lot of the technical glitches, but one of these days we'll be able to get back together and regather even fully, you know, just, but about that, I know there are some states that are going backwards. And have you guys heard kind of the latest, you know, just, I mean, I'll share from Fellowship Bible Church standpoint, we're still continuing forward with how our services are being gathered. And we'll just kind of keep praying and hoping the state of Virginia keeps us where we are. But Alicia, you know, I did see you and your family on Saturday night. And is that the first time where you have been able to gather in person with your family?
Yes. So
how was that?
It was great. It was great to be back. It was great to see everybody and just to worship together and hear the teaching of the word live. And it was really special. And I'm just so thankful. I was like, God blessed us with the perfect weather too. It was not too hot. There was a nice light breeze. It was just perfect.
It was, yeah. Don, what was your experience on Saturday night? I know last podcast you kind of mentioned how you enjoyed outdoors and meeting that way.
Yeah, I really think it's fantastic, and I'm so glad we went back to it. This particular Saturday night was really a beautiful weather-wise. It cooled down, and there was a soft breeze, and there wasn't distracting noise, and it was really nice. And again, the team did a fabulous job and doing all this work and setup and everything to do it. But it was I like the setting. I think that another component on the evening service is that it's not as structured in terms of meeting the state's protocol in distancing and so forth, and the ushering in and out
Right.
is absent. So it facilitates a more informal fellowship context. Whereas Sunday mornings, by following the protocol that we are to follow from the state mandates, that can be a little bit mechanic, in terms of getting people in and out. And it's not our fault. It's not our leaders' fault. We're following what we've been instructed to do. But that outdoor service, just the informality of it, I think really facilitates a better fellowship. And you watch people and they're staying around.
Yeah.
They're chit-chatting afterwards, and people aren't in a big rush to exit, to leave. And
that is true, and that goes to the purpose of even this whole sermon series. A little bit of a segue, but the idea of our church is called to gather. Our church is called to meet, and I just really appreciate how our leadership has taken us down that path, because I still know plenty of churches that aren't meeting, that are not gathering, and they're missing out, and it's something that I think we're setting a model in the community, hopefully, to have these varieties where we are outside and we are inside, and we're doing it safely, and with health and people's safety first, obviously, and keeping that in mind.
Yeah.
I just really appreciate it. So, and there is a lot of work that goes into it, but it's all for the glory of God and all for the benefit of the body. So that is key. Yeah.
Yeah, the variety is necessary, because people have different positions and practices through this whole thing, and the fact that there is the indoor services that are available as well gives a broad sweep of being able to include the whole gamut in terms of how people want to practice in light of that.
Yeah.
Right.
So
well, diving in, just kind of to recap this sermon and also just where we are. Obviously, we're in the middle of a sermon series called "The Church: God's Family in a Fallen World," and it began with Mark Carey. He kind of gave a couple just overviews. John Morrison dove into Ephesians 4. We got into unity. Don, your first sermon was a couple weeks ago, and the Alert Church, and then this past week was entitled "The Discerning Church." So I'm curious of kind of where the word discerning came from in your thoughts and in the process of kind of the context of this passage of really being others focused, and how does the word discerning play into the overall idea of the sermon?
yeah, good question, Mark. The word discerning came about by again, as the series was going to be planned, one of the passages that was suggested was James 2, and I've done a lot of work in James over the years, and so I decided to ask for that passage. I think that the word discerning, and that was from me, came from the fact of James 2 is about a wrong measurement of people. The partiality that was being practiced that James addresses was due to the fact that they were sizing up people on the basis of externals, particularly wealth and poverty and that type of thing. So James reminds them, about the fact that you can't tell a book by its cover, that these people that are being in a way neglected and so forth, numbers of them are wealthy in the sense in which God measures wealth. So I think that the word discerning comes from just being able to discern from behind the externals, what's behind the externals by which we often measure people. And so I chose the word discerning because it's seeing more than what we see, so to speak.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
You did a good job kind of encapsulating what that looks like, but the word discerning really finally connected for me at the end of your sermon when you talked about Patty and that person that you saw and then she saw a second time, a couple of weeks later, and how, you initially just kind of took notice of the outward appearance, but then when she saw and interacted with that person, she was able to, with her discerning heart, see their need and who they are as an individual. And so that really sums up that we really need eyes to be able to see.
Oh, did we lose her?
yeah, she's locked up there.
Locked up. So yeah, we had eyes to really see people, I think was where she was going, to see people from how God sees them, right? And not how the world would see people.
Right.
It's funny because I have almost a similar story of your story where this is years ago. I lived in a different town and was downtown with the youth pastor who I was serving with, and we were just having lunch, and a guy just walked right by us and walked outside, and I was just thinking to myself, oh, that's just some random kid, and he had this reaction that was just like your wife's, where he said, man, I just wonder if that kid knows God. And I'm very young. I mean, I've been a believer for a while, but I just never had that perspective. And to hear it from this youth pastor who I was serving with, to verbalize that, what he was really thinking, and for me to hear his heart to say he saw every kid around us because he was a youth pastor and he cared about that kid. And that was a teaching moment to me. And I'm sitting there in a Taco Bell, I think is where we were, just looking around. I'm just out for myself, thinking about, okay, what am I going to eat the next day and this and that. And he was just saying, does that kid know God? and to have a heart for a lost, really, I think, to see people how Jesus saw people, and you wove in those stories of how Jesus saw people. It's such a high standard and such a high bar that we have that call. And so I appreciate, like Alicia was saying, how your wife had that perspective and how you're able to share that.
Her life always makes a great sermon. If I didn't have her, what would I do for illustrations?
Yeah. And also the idea that the discerning concept didn't really come up until the end. Looking back to the beginning, your call was almost, well, we have to actually take things from our head and our hearts and actually put them into action. And that's part of James as well. And just your story of starting out as just a person throwing in a starfish to save a starfish, and he's doing something one starfish at a time, not creating an organization or not setting up this group of people and being a part of an organization to say, yeah, I feel special because I'm doing something like that, but actually physically doing something. Speak to that aspect, Don, because I mean, our church, we want to be a church that serves and that gives and that cares and does things, but how can we take it to the next level to actually be the hands and feet of Christ?
Yeah, I think we have to ask God to open our eyes to opportunities, because they're all around us, but we don't see them. Lift up your eyes to the harvest, Jesus said, and meaning that the harvest is there. You have to have eyes opened to be able to see what's there. And usually it's much closer to us than what we ever thought. It might be a next door neighbor. It might be someone that we work with, whatever be the case. But I think that what I sought to bring out and what I personally believe is just personal involvement in the lives of people versus it's not wrong to be a part of a cause, but I think if we limited our involvement through causes or organizations or through just financial contributions, that kind of thing, it can lose we're not really grabbing what is being spoken there. And I'd like to give a little bit of an analogy related to financial giving. When God calls us to give financially to his work, it's not because he needs the money. It's because giving is good for us too. I mean, it's what it does for us is it releases our affection for money and being generous with it. And so his call to give is beneficial to us. Equally true is our involvement in people's lives personally is good for us, not only for the person that we're seeking to minister to or to help. At the end of the last phrase in James 1:27, pure and undefiled religion, to visit orphans and widows in their distress, most of the English versions say, and to keep yourself unstained from the world. The word and is not in the Greek text. And the last phrase is actually a participle. It's called a participle of result. What it means is as we minister to people in their need, whether it's poverty or whether it's other kinds of needs, he says, it has a result of keeping us unstained from the world. It keeps our perspective right. It keeps us more eternally focused. And so I think personal involvement, no two are going to be alike. I gave a few examples of people from our church, and there's hundreds of examples from people in our church. We don't even know about most of them, but they're plugged into somebody's life to come alongside of them, to assist them in life, and that personal involvement. That's a whole different category than it is to be part of something that's what would I call it? Just a layer back or just a step back of being personal.
Yeah,
which is,
I mean,
the first Timothy passage that you brought to light too, for those who are rich, as for the rich in this present age, charge them not to be haughty, nor set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but on God. So our hope is in God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. They are to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous, and to be ready to share, thus storing up treasure for themselves as a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of that which is truly life. And for me, my husband and I had that experience of someone who poured into our lives as a young married couple, and they were so generous. They provided a job for me as a nanny, and they paid me way too much money for that job. And they provided jobs around the house for my husband to do so that we could earn extra money. And with their generosity, and because God had blessed them abundantly, they shared that abundance with us. But more importantly, they sowed into our lives and discipled us. And through those years, we had so much growth in our doctrine, our theology, and just pursuing the Lord and knowing him in a deeper way. And it was so tangible because these people cared enough to take time out of their life to pour into ours, and we forever are indebted to them for that. And so for us, we really have been able to experience that true life because of how God used them providentially in our lives, and I'm just so grateful for that.
yeah, story.
Yeah, that's great. So Don, just back to James real quick. I'm just curious, kind of share the context. I mean, is this to the church that the call is to display this kind of love and care to others within the church, or is it out of the church and the unbelievers?
Yeah, well, let me tell you how I did that in the sermon. The text is dealing within the church,
Right.
that when that poor person comes in who doesn't have the appearance of having anything to offer, that they can be, in a sense, shunned or kind of neglected or whatever be the case. And so he's addressing believers with the believers. the principle that I see in that's a larger principle is to measure other people through divine eyes, through God's eyes. So the examples I gave, some of them referred to believers and some of them referred to unbelievers. So you have the Samaritan woman with the 5 times divorced. She's an unbeliever at the time, but she becomes a believer at that time. The woman that was considered a Gentile dog, she's the one that says even the dogs will pick up the crumbs from the table. Then Jesus commends her faith and says, I haven't seen faith that great in all of Israel. So there you got a believer. Zacchaeus actually becomes a believer, but he also repents from his sin at the same time. He wants to repay people that he stole money from. So there you kind of got a mixed bag. You got both the unbelieving aspect and the believing aspect. The woman that snuck up behind Jesus to touch his garment, who had the flow of blood, apparently she believed. She knew that he could heal her, and there was your faith has made you well, he says. So apparently she had faith prior to the actual miracle. So you have both, and that was the idea of the sermon. We take that larger principle and see people as God sees them.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Our community group last night. So Alicia and I are in the same community group. So whenever you're part of our podcast, you get some of the inside tracks on some of the things we chat about the night before we do this podcast. But we talked about how it is challenging in that discernment, for example, that we always have to have each and every day of how can we be the hands and feet of Christ? We can't just give money to every homeless person we see in the street. We can't just feed, every person who is poor. We can't just help every person in need. And look at what Jesus did. I mean, he had the ability of helping everyone, but there's specific times, specific areas where he did that and used his discernment to do that for a greater purpose. And I think that was a relief, because you can really feel the guilt piling on potentially of, oh, I'm not doing enough.
Yeah.
Or what, or maybe judging others that they're not doing enough. And so how can there be this discernment when to speak, when to be quiet, when to give, when not to give, when to go somewhere, when to stay home. And so having those stories of what Jesus did, I think, is a great tool to say, this is how he did it. And we can kind of model that as well.
Well, you bring up a real good point, though, because anything you can go into a ditch and get into a guilt complex that God's not intended. I mean, we can't minister to everybody all the time. And if we think we can, and then we realize we can't. And I don't have an easy answer to how we determine what we should or should not be involved in. And when I say should not necessarily because it's bad, it's just that we can't do everything.
Right.
And I think I think it does boil down that in our personal walk with Christ that we can have, I know this sounds very subjective, but we can have a sense. If my father-in-law is a very godly man. In fact, he's such a gracious man. That's why my wife gets what she does from him. That's how he sees people. And he once said, if it's not light, it's not right. And meaning if it's going to be, like John says in 1 John, his commands are not burdensome. And when something becomes a burden, then we need to take a second look and say, maybe I'm not, if it becomes guilt motivated and burdensome, we better take another look that we may be attributing God's calling to, that it's really not. On the other hand, we can have a sensitivity to in our walk with God, a sensitivity to his spirit in where he would have us plug into an individual, and whether it's even to hand a person a $10 bill or whether it's to be involved with them on a weekly or even daily basis for years. We have to ask him for his discernment in those things. Yeah. Otherwise, you make a valid and very good point. Otherwise, it can be, we can be living life under a pile that God's not intended for us to live.
Definitely not intended. And go ahead, Alicia.
Oh, I just think that keeping in step with the Spirit and really trusting God to bring you into those circumstances and introducing you to those people, and just in whatever it is, if you're at work or if you're a stay-at-home mom or you're sick in the hospital, wherever you're at, there God is always working, and he's always introducing situations and people in our lives, and just being in step with the Spirit. He is so kind to lead us into relationships, and something that we talked about last night, sometimes even we need discernment when maybe we are extending generosity to someone or pursuing someone in a certain way, and they don't want that, and so sometimes we need discernment to say okay, and just step back and respecting respecting them in that way as well. So it can
Yeah.
go both ways.
Yeah, definitely. No, I'm glad we're touching on this because honestly, I mean, whenever a sermon comes each and every week, there can be a lot of different practical applications. And here in our podcast chat, we get a chance to flesh out some of the practical real life applications and what it really looks like and means. And the things that I really try to flesh out is, well, how do we do that? And what we're saying is we're walking by the Spirit. And then why are we to do that? And so you don't want to have improper motivations, because something else that you can look at is the world. Unbelievers are out there attempting to do a lot of the same stuff that this passage is calling us to do, feed the poor and serve the needy. And so, but the call of our, why are we doing this? And I don't know if you guys had any thoughts on that as well, just as a believer, what makes us different than the world attempting to do these things?
One comment I have on that is just the fact that oftentimes felt needs or physical needs are an avenue to bring Christ to people. It's like, let me get back to that woman that had that snuck up behind him and touched his cloak. Her need was greater than her physical problem. He healed that, but he then called her daughter and ministered to her heart, and that was in a context where everybody was watching a very concerned daddy for his 12-year-old girl, who Jesus, raised from the dead. And this woman, it's no coincidence that her ailment had lasted 12 years. That's in the text. It's the comparison is being made between the two. And Jesus was taking the place of a loving father for this woman who had been neglected and so forth. So there again, ministering to a physical need, but went into meet a deeper need. And I think that's one of the things that we do is that it's different. We're more than just feeding people or clothing people or housing them. Mm-hmm. These are avenues by which we are moving into their lives for needs that are greater than they even see. John Morrison will tell you that counseling is it's a tool of evangelism and discipleship. People come in for counseling based upon, maybe a marital conflict or something with their kids or whatever. And he seeks to address them, but it's an avenue by which he has the opportunity to move in deeper into their lives to issues that they did not come in for, but are really more source issues of discipleship for believers or unbelieving people that need to come to faith.
That's a great example. It goes hand in hand. I mean, because you can have evangelists go out into the depths of Africa and just preach the gospel to people and pound them in their head, but yet they have no running water.
Right. Right.
So it goes hand in hand where you have to. It's both the physical and the spiritual needs of people.
Exactly.
I know that my first inclination in situations is to walk in and judge. And that's exactly what we're being addressed about, is our judgments here. And 2:13b says mercy triumphs over judgment. And so just mercy is God's heart, and the judging that's his business. And for us, to realize that at the foot of the cross, we're all equal. We all have we're equal in our worth. We're equal in our need. We all need a savior. And Jesus showed us mercy in sending his son for us. And that's something that we didn't deserve. And so in walking into situations of judgment and be, whatever that may look like, mercy triumphs over judgment. And just remembering that that is God's heart, and his desire for us is to show mercy to others.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, in the song we sang, it's his mercy is more. And, words like that can stick in your head during the course of the week and remind you of
Yeah.
of the gospel.
I was just going to say, I've been singing Mercy is More ever since Sunday in my head.
There you go.
Awesome.
Well, that's great. And you might not know every single word of every verse, but there's a hook, and there's something that's reminding of us.
Yeah.
And again, to me, that's the purpose of our gatherings as well, is just to redirect us, reorient us back to that gospel message. So when we lose sight, we've got some sort of tool to bring us back.
I want to, if I'm taking too much time here, you tell me. Please feel free to let me know. We got to bring her down, close her down here. But
yeah,
I want to say with you, Mark, on those of you that are on the creative arts and planning the services and so forth, that music is a form of art, and I believe that art is meant, whether it's painting, sculpture, music, poetry, whatever be the case, any form of art is meant to connect what we know with what we feel. I think sometimes we underplay in our Western society, underplay the power of emotion.
Right.
Even story is art, and the music, even if the music has lyrics that has theology that we've known for years and years, singing it connects our knowledge of it with our being able to feel it.
Yep.
Feel that theology and knowing that theology are both important. I think too many times we think that if we know the theology, then we've crossed the finish line, we've arrived. But I really believe God wants us to feel theology as well, and music is what bridges that.
Yeah, well, I've heard tons of analogies with different conferences I've been to, but you can internalize and read God's word, or next level, you can actually read it out loud and hear it being said, or you can sing it and sing God's word, or then you can put music to it and it adds emotion and depth. And then the next level is you can do that with hundreds of other people with the music and the depth and emotion, and hear everybody else. So there's these, not that just reading on your own is bad, but there's the layer of the emotion that can help really internalize it and allow you to kind of really experience something unique that God only created for us. And it's special. And the angels in heaven are doing it. The world around us, the whole at-large global church is doing it. And what a great preamble to what's going to happen.
It's a holistic picture of our heart and our mind being connected, and then as an outpouring of that, the Spirit moves. It's just so neat to see how God designed us in that way.
Churches that do the singing time as a body as just preliminary to a sermon are usually dead churches, because intellectual accumulation is fine, but it leads to deadness when it's not connected with practice and the sense of our whole being in those truths. And music is equally as important in our gathering as our team.
Well, you can get me started, and this can go on for another hour.
Yeah,
so no, it's great. But Don, I know that you have another sermon coming up this week, and it sounds like you're probably not going to be with us for the next week's podcast. So give us kind of a little taster of what that looks like, and any kind of preliminary thoughts on what to expect for this coming week.
Sure. Psalm 133, it's just 3 verses, and it's filled with some beautiful imagery utilizing the anointing oil of Aaron and also the dew from Mount Hermon. And I'll be explaining the imagery of those two and how they pertain to unity. And as we've been talking about emotion here, that's what the psalm is about, is sensing the emotional pleasantness of oneness and unity. And I think I was thinking about it this morning because I listened to a podcast called The World and Everything in It. Les Sillers is one of the speakers on it on today's episode from our church. But anyway, they were addressing the rise in the COVID and California basically shutting down yesterday again, including worship services and so forth. Mark Carey and I met yesterday early in the morning. We touched base. We haven't seen each other for a while. He's been on vacation. And I shared with him that, I think that COVID is, regardless of what one thinks about the virus and about the mandates and all this and that, it is impacting believers gathering together, and it's eroding it. It's slowly eroding it, I'm afraid, in our country, and we're not immune to that. And I hope that the message this week will just be another added impetus or another added motivation amongst the others, that not just sermons, but other people that are addressing this issue of the sheer joy of what unity experienced is when people are in oneness, and how much it takes the sting out of life. You gather together with unified people. It just is a renewing, refreshing, and that experience. And that's what the psalmist means with the dew of Mount Hermon, and the anointing oil of Aaron was highly perfumed. The fragrance of it just permeated the congregation. And that's what the imagery is about. So,
yeah, it's great. And this will be the final sermon of this sermon series. So it'd be great to kind of wrap it up and really come full circle about being unified as we gather, but unified just together to bring God glory as well. Yeah. Like I think what Mark was sharing in the very beginning. So yeah. I'm excited about that. And I'll tell you, side note, our worship planning team, we've always loved to be creative, and we're brainstorming how can we spray perfume on everybody to get the imagery and the smells of Aaron's beard. But I don't know. Stay tuned for that. I don't think that can actually happen, but
you can do the scented filters that can go in the air conditioning system.
Yeah.
And I don't know, for the outside service, you have to get something really strong, but
really strong.
Strong. Rose had an idea for the kids. The kids have something that actually is going to be something I won't spill the beans.
There you go. Well, stay tuned for that, and come on this weekend services and see what you can experience and smell in the worship time. So, well, thank you guys so much for being here today. And again, just continue to interact with us. Going to our website, fbcva.life, to learn all about where we are at church and interacting with us with these podcasts. And just again, the fact of the matter, guys, is that sermons are not meant to take just an hour, but rather transform a lifetime. So until next week, much love. God bless.